Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Looking at my fellow speakers this evening, I already had fairly acute imposter syndrome, which is, during that amazing first half, has only been heightened by the knowledge I have of what my first slide is going to be. Some of you may recognize what magazine this comes from. I've always had a bit of a thing about Hello magazine. I grew up in mid-Wales, and easily the most glamorous time of my life was when my mum went to have her haircut, and I would sit in the waiting room waiting for her to be finished reading Hello magazine about all these glossy, sleek, tanned, rich people and their glossy, sleek, rich, tanned lives. This particular feature article, if we can call it that, dates from the edition of Hello from March 2012. It features Christina Estrada. Those of you who had the Pirelli calendar in 1988 may recognize her. She used to be a supermodel. By the time this photograph was taken, she is long retired. This was, in fact, on the occasion of her 50th birthday, when her husband, Walid al-Jafali, a very wealthy Saudi gentleman, took her to celebrate her birthday on a luxury resort on the edge of the empty quarter in the Gulf. It was an occasion for many photographs of her and many different costume changes. There's some more. Top left, that's her with falcons. Frankly, I think the bloke looks quite nervous about what she's going to do with the falcon, but she seems fine with it. Anyway, there we go. That's her amid the sand dunes. It was a nice party for her. I mean, she, to be honest, gave an interview also. She clearly liked it. She gave an interview with the photographs in which she said, "It was incredible that my husband could do this for me. He felt it was a big birthday. Life had given us many changes and many chapters, so it needed to be celebrated." And they really, really went for it when they celebrated. It was difficult for them in a way to have a party because she normally lived here. Modest residence just on the edge of Windsor Great Park, valued approximately £100 million. But they didn't spend all their time there. They spent some of their time in their villa in Gstaad, some of their time in their palazzo in Venice, quite a lot of time in their palace in Jeddah, which meant that their friends were scattered all around the world. And when your friends are scattered and it's difficult to have a surprise birthday party, which is what Walid al-Jafali had in mind. So he brought in, I'm guessing here, but I'm guessing he maybe asked a few of his friends to lend him their private jets. And they flew in the friends from Gstaad and Venice, Jeddah, Windsor, elsewhere, and they all flew to this lovely resort on the edge of the empty quarter where they had a party, and what a party it was. Look at them, all these sleek, glossy, tanned people, and look at their cake. I mean, none of these people look to me like they eat cake very much. Not as a regular proposition, but that is easily the biggest cake you're ever going to see that isn't in a gangster movie and doesn't have someone about to jump out of it waving a machine gun. The gentleman in the top right there in the white tuxedo, that is Mr. al-Jafali himself. You can't really see it in this photograph, sorry, the quality. That tuxedo has jeweled lapels. The girl at the bottom left, that's their daughter. And actually, you know what, and I'm being cynical and sardonic here, but I do actually really love Hello magazine, because I think this is really romantic. This is kind of the Hello magazine story. You've got this astonishingly, incredibly wealthy man. A later court proceedings that we're about to come to described his wealth as immeasurable. You have this incredibly beautiful woman. They marry each other. They love each other. I was singing and dancing for 3 nights, she told her friend Tamara Beckwith, the journalist. It's not hard-hitting journalism. I had so much energy and was so happy. And they have the princess there, the fruit of their marriage, isn't it? Isn't it gorgeous? Isn't it lovely? Sadly, the romance, this balloon, this gorgeous pink balloon of romance is pricked once again by the thumbtack of reality. Because 2 days after this happened, and in fact, a month before this article was even published, this happened. That is Walid al-Jafali. That is 25-year-old Lujain Adada, a Lebanese model and MTV presenter who became his second wife. So before this amazing romantic feature about the depth of his love for his 50-year-old first wife was published, he had already married someone else. Now, this was in the Palazzo in Venice and was by all accounts a truly magnificent party. Her necklace alone was worth $3 million. And don't they both look fantastic? I think he looks a bit like a South American dictator, sort of into the kind of fifth decade of his reign, but I think she looks great. Sadly, though he is a Saudi gentleman, he has obviously the right under Saudi law to have up to 4 wives, but his first wife, Cristina Estrada, had no real tolerance for polygamy and told him that she wanted a divorce. Now, if you are as wealthy as Walid al-Jafali, divorce has significant consequences. It is a potentially very expensive thing to happen. And he appears to, at this point, when she threatened divorce, to rethink. He said, my dear, I'm sorry, it was a moment of madness. I'm putting words into his mouth, I wasn't there. It's the moment of madness, you're the only girl for me, I'm going to get rid of the new girl, and we'll carry on as before. So Cristina Estrada rescinded the threat of divorce, and that was that, and everything was lovely. This all took place in August 2013, by the way. Now, Walid al-Jafali is someone who lives in this place that we call offshore. I call it, in my book of the same name, for sale downstairs, I call it Moneyland. It is a world that is essentially created by those people who are so rich they no longer are tied down by any country. And we think of offshore as being something that applies only really to money. And his money was offshore, don't get me wrong. It was owned via exotic shell companies, numbered bank accounts, foundations, and all of the usual paraphernalia that the very, very rich have, who very much like enjoying the privilege of society but don't really want the obligations that go along with it. But offshore isn't just about money. Offshore is much broader than that. Now just look at what offshore actually means. What it means is you are taking advantages of the lax regulations elsewhere in order to enjoy privileges at home. So he was living in Saudi Arabia a lot of the time, but he kept his wife and his daughter not in Saudi Arabia, where they wouldn't have been able to go outside, where they wouldn't have been able to drive cars. He kept them in London, where they had privileges which otherwise they would have been denied. So really, he not only kept his money offshore, he kind of kept his family offshore too. Now, if you're as rich as he is, you don't just keep your money and your family offshore, you also keep your reputation offshore. You establish a reputation as a philanthropist in the UK, and he was a very generous one. He once bid $500,000 for a nude photograph of Kate Moss for charity. And if you have a reputation as a philanthropist in the UK, no muckraking journalist such as me can write about you, because if you do, you are liable to be sued for defamation. So not only is your money and your family offshore, but your reputation is offshore too. And it can be very boring if you've got one of these passports, if you're a rich person from a poor country and you've got a second-rate passport. So fortunately, these days, you can buy yourself a new passport as well. If you buy a passport from Malta, from Cyprus, from St. Kitts and Nevis, or one of the many other jurisdictions that are very accommodating to the wealthy, you also have your reputation, your children, your money, and then your citizenship offshore. Everything is offshore at a price. But none of these solutions really were going to help Walid al-Jafali in this parlous situation that he found himself in, whereby he had married a 25-year-old, but yet was still married to a 50-year-old. What was he going to do about this? I don't know how the idea came to him. I have not only a passion for late 80s glossy monthly magazines, but also a passion for late 80s glossy action buddy cop movies. So I have a theory that they were watching this film here. Some of you, anyone recognize this? Surely. Lethal Weapon 2 is one of the best films of the 1980s. That there is Mel Gibson. Admittedly, you can't see him very well in this record. That there at the back is Joss Ackland, sporting an extremely unconvincing South African accent. He is running drugs into Los Angeles, but he can't be busted in this particular scenario by Mel Gibson because he has, and he holds up his piece of paper and says, diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity is the answer to everyone's problems and was particularly the answer to Walid al-Jafali's problems. So perhaps because of this, probably not, I'm going to have to concede, he decided that what he really needed was diplomatic immunity because, you see, he had not got rid of the new girl. Instead, he had installed her here in a converted £31 million church in Knightsbridge, where she had 2 of their children and they lived very happily together. Sooner or later, Cristina Estrada was going to find out that he was very much still married to the 25-year-old. So in December 2013, he flew to St. Lucia. St. Lucia is an island in the Caribbean. It is a Commonwealth island, and he had conversations with the government, and he promised to build them a diabetes research center, and he emerged as the ambassador to the International Maritime Organization. The International Maritime Organization is a UN agency which deals with the regulations of the sea. It is based in London. It is not previously an organisation St. Lucia had taken very seriously, but that turned out not to be a problem because he never attended any of its meetings. But in August 2014, he was added to the London diplomatic list, and this meant that he had full diplomatic immunity, and he was then able to say, "I divorce you 3 times, which is all that is required under Saudi law for a man to get rid of his wife." She lawyered up, of course she did, but when her lawyers wrote to him, they were informed, as Joss Ackland informed Mel Gibson, possibly with a better accent, that he had diplomatic immunity and she could go whistle. Now, her lawyers wrote to the St. Lucian government and said, would you consider waiving the diplomatic immunity, which is what people tend to do in cases like this. But the St. Lucian government insisted on sticking to their principles. No, they would not. So then the British government wrote to the St. Lucian government. This is a bigger deal. This is a Commonwealth country, the recipient of much British aid. The Queen is still the head of state. Her face is on the currency. Would they waive diplomatic immunity? No, they would not. So in January 2016, this case came to court. Was he really an ambassador? Could he really have immunity from giving his wife a fair divorce settlement or not? Brilliantly, Lord Justice Hayden performed the legal equivalent of Danny Glover's 50-yard headshot in Lethal Weapon 2 and single-handedly revoked, that's Danny Glover's word, not Lord Justice Hayden's, the diplomatic immunity, announced that no, he was not, that his diplomatic status was a sham, at which point our government completely panicked, because you cannot have judges going around revoking diplomatic immunity. It is very important that our ambassador in Moscow remains our ambassador in Moscow and that a court in Moscow does not suddenly decide that actually he should be liable for criminal proceedings or any kind of civil proceedings. So our government joined an appeal against this ruling, and actually it was overturned. Walid al-Jafali was, in fact, an ambassador all along. And that is how this story ends. In fact, Walid al-Jafali did not get to enjoy his wealth for very long. He died, sadly, of lung cancer. And this sad story has rather been consigned to the sort of back copies of the tabloids. But why should you care? Well, it's interesting. I was trying to think of a way of describing why you should care, and I was watching Danger Mouse with my 5-year-old last week, and I told him he couldn't have another episode of Danger Mouse. And he told me, "Dad, you are a dipper." And I said, what? And it turned out that in their school they have this rather lovely idea that in the middle of the classroom there is a metaphorical bucket. And some people are pourers into the bucket of joy and happiness, and some people are dippers from the bucket. If you take joy from a situation, you are a dipper. If you add joy to the situation, you are a pourer in. And everyone must be a pourer in, and everyone must not be a dipper. And I was a dipper, because I wouldn't let him watch Danger Mouse. But the situation that from a civilizational perspective, Walid al-Jafali is one hell of a dipper. And it's not just Walid al-Jafali, may he rest in peace, but all of the people I write about in Moneyland who are people who abuse our society by living here and shopping here and keeping their children here and sending their children to our schools, but they don't pay our taxes and they don't obey our laws. And in fact, they are essentially free-riding on our democracy, because democracy is a contract between everyone, and everyone has rights and everyone has obligations. And if you only enjoy the rights and none of the obligations, then you are a dipper. And we have, as my friend Tobin told me, no time for dippers. Thank you very much for listening.